That's where people are running because their money has been so devalued and they have no alternative. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is to get people on programmable, surveillable money by any means necessary. So if you won't do it because you're like, oh yeah, this is a way I'm going to use JP Morgan coin and beat the Fed CBDC, if you're not going to get suckered into that, then it seems like they'll use destabilization and desperation as a way to get people to onboard into the systems that they're creating. They're not just going to spend billions of dollars creating these systems and have no one use them. They're going to try and use either desperation created by public sector policies or by private sector policies, and then have, sort of like 2008. Oh, look, the private banks have destroyed the economy. Now we need the public sector to come in and rein them in, even though Obama's cabinet that was supposed to be doing that was literally chosen by Citigroup, right? They're the ones that are going to come in and they're going to rein these in, and these are the policies and changes that need to be made. But actually, it's the bankers that wrote the changes that need to be made, right? So we're likely going to get set up for something like that, where they're going to try and make like existing money worthless. And if you want your money to be worth anything and maintain any sort of semblance of purchasing power, you have to use financial products X, Y, and Z. And they're all going to be programmable and surveillable, if not by the private sector, by the public sector. And they're all going to be interoperable. They're going to be all these different wallets and digital ID systems that look like they're different companies, but they're all the same, essentially, in terms that they can export all their data to the same central global database. And, that's essentially the goal here. So how do we fight against that? Don't use the database, don't use the digital wallet, don't use the digital ID, don't interact with the system. And I think also, I think Bitcoin is obviously very key to their plans, but they need Bitcoin to stay, as Larry Fink said, a technology for asset storage. They refuse to have it be a currency.
Whitney Webb's recent warning sheds light on the entry of major financial players like BlackRock into the crypto realm. For those unfamiliar with BlackRock, they wield immense influence as arguably the most powerful company on the planet. Not only do they currently hold the title of the largest asset manager globally, managing over $10 trillion, but they also have stakes in nearly every major corporation. In early 2024, BlackRock, along with its CEO, Larry Fink, made a foray into the world of Bitcoin by launching a Bitcoin ETF. However, Webb cautions that this move isn't a positive development. She argues that BlackRock's primary objective is to expand their assets under management and increase their global dominance. Part of their strategy involves devaluing fiat currencies and exerting control over Bitcoin. Despite this ominous outlook, Webb maintains that there's hope. By remaining vigilant and informed, investors can utilize Bitcoin as a tool to push back against the flaws inherent in the traditional banking system. Webb contends that beneath BlackRock's seemingly benevolent intentions lies a more sinister agenda.
And actually, Jeffrey Epstein gave an interview about Bitcoin that I didn't know about until maybe a couple months ago when we started researching this. Yep. Oh, yes.
No
and
idea.
He says the exact same thing Larry Fink says. It's not a currency. It's, a technology for asset store. Basically, if Bitcoin is kept in that box that people like Larry Fink and Jeffrey Epstein and people like them, Larry Summers, presumably, who was on the Zappo advisory board, these guys want Bitcoin to be a specific thing because they can use it. And there's people in the space, like this RSK guy, saying Bitcoin needs to lose its revolutionary ethos. It's got to drop that and become a tool for Wall Street. I think it's pretty obvious what needs to be done to scuttle those plans, which would be ensure the opposite.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, use open source software.
So people need to be putting resources into making that happen. And by
trying my best here, Whitney.
The fact
trying
that,
my best.
Well, sure, but basically to recap on that, if they need the Bitcoin blockchain for asset storage, and presumably, if we're right about what's going on in this article, which we seem to be, carbon markets, they need that blockchain. How do we invert their plans and use the Bitcoin blockchain so that it's the tool of financial freedom it was heralded to be? Because they can't get rid of it. without scuttling their own plans. One of them is that as Bitcoin becomes integrated into Wall Street, Bitcoin has to shed its ethos, as he called it. Essentially, it has to stop being a tool of dissent, a threat to both commercial and central banks, and essentially become their tool. That's what he says. So for Bitcoin to succeed, in his eyes, that has to happen. So that's very telling. And then he also says that there's going to be a concerted push to move away from money printed by the state, meaning central banks, and instead move to commodity-backed stablecoins where the people that own the commodities will have all the power. I think that's very interesting. Because obviously Milei, in his case, right, came to power framing himself as very libertarian, but his policies thus far have shown him to be very crony capitalist, in my opinion. We've talked about this before, and Mark brought up some stuff, to that point. But keep in mind too that a lot of the people in his government are from J.P. Morgan, for example, or the Argentinian branch of major Wall Street banks. He's been very closey with people like Fink and Musk, as discussed, among others, and very friendly with like Zelensky and the Ukraine stuff. I mean, this is not a very libertarian guy under other metrics, and there's been a lot of antagonism with him and Argentina's central bank, which of course is responsible for a lot of bad stuff that has happened in Argentina. But people also need to remember the history of how Argentina got here, which as a lot of this fiscal trouble for Argentina began when it was run by a U.S. and CIA-backed military coup, then under Carlos Menem, who was the great, I say this great not in the actually like, oh, that was great sense, like big, I guess, the big neoliberal in Argentina, recent political history, who was basically just like a goon for, U.S., foreign interests really to like gobble up Argentinian resources. Milei is a big fan of Menem, and some of his the people that are in his government started their political careers under Menem, like Patricia Bullrich, the interior minister, for example. So, you could really frame Milei as a continuation of that stuff, because Mauricio Macri, a lot of people in Milei's government are from the Macri government, especially his economics team. There's a direct line to all of that. And so I am very concerned that, that would be celebrated as like a big, yes, he's gonna, the central bank's not gonna print the peso anymore. It's over and he's saved Argentina. Well, is it really saving Argentina if he's, going to make, they're going to use dollar peg stable coins. They're regulating the cred of Bitcoin right now. They're going to move to this whole model of commodity-backed stablecoins, which is already actually happening in Argentina. A company backed by Visa that's based in Argentina is tokenizing basically all of the country's grain deposits to use that as currency. So whoever owns all of the grains, and the biggest landowner is a big former backer of Mauricio Macri, part of Endeavor Argentina. His name is Eduardo Elstein. He owns all of the commodities. He's also a big shareholder of some of Israel's biggest companies. He's going to be the guy that basically controls the money then, right? At least with the grain-backed stable coins. So if you have all these oligarchs in charge of different industries, which is essentially what Argentina has been becoming and has been happening really everywhere around the world, who's going to be in charge of the money? Is that really better than the central bank having it? Because remember, the central bank's run by the commercial banks. So you're just getting, the same shit under a different, name, basically. I don't know. There's a lot of different stuff going on here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. I think the cornerstone of the response really does need to be self-reliance, because if you're hoping on people in the private sector solving this problem for you because they don't like ESG, I don't think that's enough at all. And talking about this public-private play, it's important to keep in mind that what happens, just look at the Treasury Secretary office alone. So like in Clinton, it was Robert Rubin, Goldman Sachs. He helps repeal Glass-Steagall. And then when that whole bubble pops in 2008, Goldman Sachs' Henry Paulson is Treasury of the Secretary. Then it's Tim Geithner, who worked under Larry Summers, and Robert Rubin is Treasury Secretary under Obama. And then it's Steve Mnuchin, who was involved in the 2008 financial crisis and whose dad was one of the top guys at Goldman Sachs, and he was also Goldman Sachs. So what they do when they're in power is that they create policies that help benefit them. They came from Goldman Sachs with intentions to implement policies that benefit Goldman Sachs, right? And so generally what happens is that when the private sector wants something, or they've created a big market for something, they've invested lots of money in creating something like the carbon market, and no one's using the carbon market. They are going to then use the public sector to force people to use the carbon market. And so they're trying to do that through the guise of climate emergency, right? And that's not working. So if that's not working, how will they go about and how will they do it? Well, like Mark and I have discussed before, they're trying to go about it the private sector route. Oh, okay, you guys aren't interested in programmable, surveillable money if it's emitted by the central bank. So if it's emitted by a private bank, maybe you will. Well, I think it's important to say, too, that I think there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin media space that will never talk about this or what you just mentioned. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of money and effort has been put into specifically homogenizing media discourse in the Bitcoin space, because they want Bitcoiners as much as possible to be compliant, while Larry Fink and his ilk do what they want with Bitcoin and make it what they want it to be, so that people are content with number go up and sort of the Saylor-esque talking points that have gotten a lot of, a lot of people have heard those versus what you just mentioned, from example. There needs to be a cultural shift in Bitcoin in the opposite direction of what this Diego guy from Rootstock said, where he's like, we need to drop the whole, stop fiscal irresponsibility of the banks and central banks, and be a challenge and threat to their power. We have to drop that if we want to get rich. I mean, that's the mentality there. And I feel like the Saylor mentality really isn't that different from that. We have to push people in the other direction, because if we go in the direction they're pushing those, people to go in, people that want to drop the ethos or whatever and make Bitcoin just a tool for Wall Street. No. If we let that happen, very bad things happen, and there has to be a fight. And there's a specific effort that's been launched against people that hold Bitcoin to try and get them to be compliant in that sense. And that's through controlling the discourse in the media space. There needs to be a desire among Bitcoiners to return to the original ethos, not the opposite. There needs to be a fight for that. People need to care about that again. I just want to chime in really quick. So part of what we're talking about here, part of the way to defeat this apparatus that as Mark referred to it, so much of what they do, including their media ops, in efforts to control discourse, but also just getting people to onboard to stuff when they otherwise wouldn't, it all runs on fear, right? And all the stuff that happened during COVID, people fell in line because of fear. It's all fear-based, pretty much everything they do. A great way to not fall into that is not be afraid of these people, no matter what psyop they throw at you. And I think this year, election year, not just in the US, but in much of the world, unprecedented fear-based psyops are going to be coming one after the other until they get enough people to comply and acquiesce. And the way to get around that is to not fall into it. It's the trap, and a lot of it is the media discourse. And I think, the more controlled online discourse becomes, the greater the effort will be to use it to get people to be very afraid of what's happening. Yeah. And if you unplug a little bit and spend more time in the actual world, you are much less likely to feel that way. And I think that's why during COVID, they wanted so much of our discourse to be online, and then they took even greater control of the online discourse. And we know now, under the guise of election censorship, they're going to clamp down even more on online discourse and lead it in very particular directions. They want Americans in particular to be at each other's throats. Textbook divide and conquer, among other things, though. I mean, they have this whole war on domestic terror apparatus, all this stuff about civil war, and we need this and that. Regular Americans are generally on the same side, and they want to divide everyone, and it's all through fear. And they've been doing this psyop after psyop after psyop, whether it's 9/11, COVID, you name it. I mean, it's all fear-based and wants to alienate you from your local community. Again, it's about self-reliance at the local level. That's a big part of the response, but it's also, getting people, not just yourself, though obviously that's where you start, but making sure that the fear doesn't anchor in to, where you are based. I think that's a big part of it.
Whitney Webb offers a crucial analysis, urging caution regarding BlackRock's entry into Bitcoin. Her warnings about central bank influence and corruption within the Bitcoin sphere emphasize the need for meticulous financial deliberation. Understanding the potential risks is paramount. Ensuring informed decisions safeguard our investments. The looming threats of currency devaluation and financial system instability underscore the necessity for vigilance. Webb's insights serve as a reminder to stay alert, proactive, and continuously educate ourselves on financial dynamics. This awareness aids in navigating the intricate landscape of finance, shielding our assets in the long run. Hope today's video provided valuable insights. Until next time, wishing you all the best. Thank you for watching.